The moment the envelope arrived, Eliza knew. Her father had found her. 5 years of carefully constructed anonymity shattered by the manila package with its too familiar handwriting. She hadn't opened it yet, but her hands trembled as she placed it on the kitchen counter, the weight of it seeming to bend the granite beneath. Outside her apartment window, Seattle's perpetual drizzle painted the cityscape in melancholy grays, a fitting backdrop for the storm brewing inside her chest. 5 years since she'd fled Boston with nothing but a damaged credit score and a broken heart. 5 years of rebuilding herself as Eliza Warren instead of Rebecca Calloway. And now this. Eliza had always been the responsible one, even as a child while her friends were spending allowances on candy and toys. She was meticulously saving, understanding the value of financial security before she could even properly define it. By 25, she'd cultivated a perfect credit score while maintaining a promising career in marketing. Her father, James Calloway, had been proud. So proud that when his architectural firm began faltering, he'd turned to her with desperation in his eyes. "Just for 6 months, Becca," he'd promised, his voice weathered with stress, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. "Let me put some of the company expenses on your credit. Once the Harrington project pays off, I'll clear it all. Your credit score won't even feel it." She should have known better. Her mother, before cancer took her when Eliza was 19, had always cautioned her about James's relationship with money. "Your father sees dollars as theoretical," she'd said once. "He counts them before they arrive and spends them twice before they're earned." But grief had softened Eliza's edges, made her susceptible to her father's magnetic charm. She'd wanted to believe him. Needed to. Now, staring at the envelope, Eliza took a steadying breath and sliced it open. Inside was a thumb drive, a short handwritten note, and a newspaper clipping. The note read simply, "The truth. I can explain. Please." The clipping was from the Boston Business Journal, dated 3 years ago. Former Calloway Architecture CFO sentenced in embezzlement scheme. Eliza's heart pounded as she read about Martin Weiss, her father's trusted financial officer, convicted of systematically draining company funds for years. With unsteady fingers, Eliza plugged the thumb drive into her laptop. Documents populated the screen. Bank statements, emails between Martin and offshore accounts, and most damning, forged signatures on credit applications. Her signature, or rather, a forgery of it. According to the timestamps, these documents dated back to when she was still in college, long before she'd ever agreed to help her father. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't authorized all those accounts. The crushing debt that had forced her to change her name, move across the country, and spend years rebuilding her financial identity. It hadn't all been her father's doing. She'd blamed him entirely, cut him off completely, when at least some of the damage had been caused by someone else. But that didn't erase the betrayal. Her father had still used her credit without proper transparency. He'd still watched her struggle to make payments on debts that grew beyond what she'd agreed to. And he'd never once mentioned Martin's involvement, not even when she'd confronted him that rainy night 5 years ago. The memory of that night crashed over her. Their screaming match in his emptying office as she waved credit statements in his face. His defensive posture, the way he'd blamed the economy, blamed choosy clients, blamed her for not understanding business. "You think I wanted this?" he'd shouted. "You think I enjoy watching everything I built crumble while my own daughter looks at me like I'm some kind of criminal?" She'd left that night, gone straight to her apartment, packed what she could fit in her car, and driven until exhaustion forced her to stop. 3 days later, she was in Seattle with a new name, ready to start over. And now this. Evidence that suggested her father wasn't entirely the villain she'd painted him to be. But if he'd known about Martin's embezzlement, why hadn't he told her? Why had he let her believe the worst? Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Unknown number with a Boston area code. Eliza stared at it, heart hammering. After 5 rings, it went to voicemail. Seconds later, a text message appeared. "Becca, I'm at the Fairmont Olympic. Room 412, please. One conversation." He was here, in Seattle. The thought made her simultaneously nauseated and curious. What more could he possibly have to say that couldn't be conveyed through the documents he'd sent? Eliza spent the next hour pacing her apartment, brewing and abandoning cups of tea, starting and discarding text responses. Finally, she typed, 2 p.m., lobby bar, public places only. His response came immediately. Thank you. The Fairmont Olympics lobby gleamed with old-world elegance, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Eliza arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table with a clear view of all entrances. She ordered a sparkling water, then changed it to a gin and tonic. Liquid courage. She spotted him before he saw her. James Calloway had aged in 5 years. His once robust frame had thinned, and silver dominated his formerly salt and pepper hair. His tailored suit, always his armor, hung slightly loose, but he still carried himself with that confident stride, chin up, shoulders back. The posture of a man who'd once built a respected firm from nothing but ambition and charm. When he finally saw her, he froze mid-step. Recognition flooded his features, followed by something that looked suspiciously like relief. "Becca," he said, approaching cautiously as one might a skittish animal. "Thank you for coming." "It's Eliza now," she corrected, not offering to shake his extended hand. "And I came for answers, not reconciliation." He nodded, withdrawing his hand and settling into the chair across from her. "You look well. The West Coast suits you." "Let's skip the small talk. You found me despite my best efforts to disappear. You sent evidence that suggests Martin was embezzling. What do you want?" James sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. "I want to explain and apologize, but mostly, I need your help." Eliza laughed bitterly. "My help? After everything? You can't be serious." "I am." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Martin wasn't working alone. There's more to the story, and I need someone I can trust. Someone with your analytical skills." "Trust?" The word felt like ash in her mouth. "You destroyed my credit, stood by while I struggled with debt collectors, watched me literally flee the state, and now you want to talk about trust?" James flinched. "I didn't know about the fraudulent accounts, Becca." "Eliza." "Not until after you left. When the company's finances became catastrophic, I hired a forensic accountant. That's when we discovered Martin's scheme. And yes, I used your credit irresponsibly for the legitimate business expenses. I was desperate and foolish. But the multiple accounts? The credit cards maxed out on personal luxury items? That wasn't me." Eliza studied her father's face, searching for the tells she'd learned to recognize in childhood. The slight twitch at the corner of his mouth when he was fabricating. The too steady eye contact when he was overselling. She saw neither. Instead, she saw exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Who was Martin working with?" she asked finally. "That's what I need help figuring out. The company's gone now. Bankruptcy proceedings finished last year. But someone's still accessing old client files, blueprints, security specs, high-profile buildings that my firm designed. I've received warnings from 2 former clients about security breaches that traced back to my firm's servers." Eliza's marketing mind immediately grasped the implications. Industrial espionage? Or something worse? "I don't know. But 3 days ago, someone broke into my home. They weren't after valuables. They went straight for my home office, my files. When I interrupted them, they attacked me." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a bandaged forearm. "Police think it was a random burglary. I don't." Despite herself, Eliza felt a twinge of concern. "Why come to me? Why not go to the authorities with your suspicions?" "Because I have no proof of anything except the break-in. Because the authorities already think I'm a failed businessman with debts, not a reliable witness. And because..." He hesitated. "Because you were always better at seeing patterns than I was. You inherited your mother's analytical mind." The mention of her mother, a deliberate tactic, Eliza was sure, still managed to soften her. Sarah Calloway had indeed been methodical where James was impulsive, cautious where he was bold. Their partnership had balanced, until cancer disrupted the equation. "Even if I believed everything you're saying," Eliza said carefully, "even if Martin was primarily responsible for the fraudulent accounts, You still took advantage of my credit without full disclosure. You still watched me drown financially. I did, James admitted, his voice breaking slightly. I convinced myself it was temporary, that I could fix it before you noticed. When things spiraled, I was too ashamed to tell you the whole truth. By the time I realized how bad it was, you were gone. New name, new state. It took me years to track you down. How did you find me? A ghost of his old smile appeared. You kept your middle name, Elizabeth, and you still donate annually to your mother's cancer research fund under E. Elizabeth Warren. Not many donors with exactly your birth date. Of course. The one sentimental attachment she'd allowed herself had been her undoing. What exactly are you asking me to do? Help me analyze the evidence I've gathered. Help me figure out who Martin was working with, who might still be accessing those files. 2 days. That's all I'm asking. If you still want nothing to do with me afterward, I'll understand. I'll disappear from your life completely. Eliza took a long sip of her drink, weighing her options. Part of her wanted to walk away, to protect the life she'd built from the chaos her father inevitably brought. But another part, the part that had idolized him as a child, the part that still ached for family, was curious. And if someone was using architectural plans for nefarious purposes, didn't she have some obligation to help stop them? 2 days, she finally agreed. We work from my apartment. I don't go back to Boston with you. And when this is over, we discuss reparations for my credit damage. Relief washed over James's face. Agreed. All of it. 4 hours later, Eliza's normally pristine living room resembled a war room. Laptop screens displayed spreadsheets and documents, while printouts covered her coffee table. James had brought not only the evidence of Martin's embezzlement, but also records of recent suspicious activities involving former Callaway architecture projects. The pattern starts 3 years ago, James explained, pointing to a timeline he'd created. Small information breaches at first, nothing alarming. But in the last 6 months, the incidents have escalated. This one, he indicated a luxury high-rise in downtown Boston, had its security system compromised last month. And this, pointing to a corporate headquarters in Cambridge, reported missing blueprints showing their server room locations. Eliza frowned, studying the data. These are all high-security clients, banks, tech companies, corporate headquarters, not typical targets for random hackers. Exactly. These are calculated breaches by someone who knows exactly what they're looking for and where to find it. As they worked through the evidence, Eliza found herself slipping into old patterns with her father. The seamless exchange of ideas, the shorthand communication that came from shared DNA and shared thinking processes. Despite everything, they still worked well together, anticipating each other's questions, filling in gaps in each other's reasoning. By midnight, fueled by takeout Thai food and too much coffee, they had narrowed their focus to 3 former employees who had worked closely with Martin and had access to the client files now being compromised. Victoria Chen, head of IT, Eliza read from the personnel file. Left the company 6 months before Martin's arrest, citing family reasons. Edward Brookstone, senior architect, fired during downsizing a year before the embezzlement was discovered. And Patricia Miles, administrative assistant with security clearance for all client files, resigned 2 weeks after Martin's arrest. James rubbed his tired eyes. Victoria was brilliant but quiet, kept to herself. Edward was bitter about being let go, made some threats on his way out. Patricia seemed devastated by Martin's arrest. They were close colleagues. Any of them have financial motives? Sudden lifestyle changes? Unexpected wealth? Edward declared bankruptcy shortly after being fired. Patricia seems to be living modestly based on social media. Victoria, James hesitated. Victoria disappeared from the radar. No social media presence, no readily available information after she left. That's interesting. Eliza pulled her laptop closer. Let me see what I can find on Victoria Chen. 3 hours and several deep internet searches later, Eliza sat back, eyes wide. I think we found our connection. Victoria Chen doesn't exist anymore because she's now Victoria Weiss. Weiss? As in, Martin Weiss's wife. They married 2 years ago very quietly while he was awaiting trial. She visits him monthly at the Federal Correctional Facility. And look at this. Eliza turned her screen to show James a property record. She purchased a condo in cash, 3 blocks from your former office, a condo she shouldn't be able to afford on an IT specialist's salary. James paled. Victoria and Martin, of course. She had the technical skills to access our systems remotely, and he had the financial knowledge to hide the money. But why continue after he's in prison? Why target old clients now? Eliza was already typing, following a hunch. Let's look at Martin's sentencing details. She quickly scanned court documents. Here it is. Martin was sentenced to 7 years, but is eligible for parole after serving 3. His parole hearing is scheduled for next month. James finished, reading over her shoulder. They're planning something, a big score before he gets out. Eliza nodded slowly. Based on the escalating pattern of breaches, I'd say they're building towards something significant. But what? They spent the next hour mapping the recently targeted buildings on a digital city map of Boston. They form a pattern, Eliza realized suddenly. Look, they're all within a 2-mile radius of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and according to this, she pulled up a news article, the reserve is scheduled to transfer a significant amount of decommissioned currency for destruction 3 weeks from now. James's eyes widened. They're gathering intelligence on all potential escape routes and security systems in the vicinity. They're planning a heist. Or creating a diversion, Eliza countered. Look at these breached systems. They control everything from traffic lights to building lockdown protocols. They could create chaos across multiple blocks, tying up emergency responders while they target the money transfer. We need to take this to the FBI, James said, reaching for his phone. Wait. Eliza placed her hand over his. We need more than conjecture. We need proof of Victoria's involvement, proof of what they're planning. How do we get that? Eliza thought for a moment. Victoria was your IT specialist. She would have built backdoors into your systems, ways to access them remotely. Those same backdoors might allow us to see what she's accessing now. You can do that? Track her digital footprints? No, Eliza admitted. But I know someone who can. A cybersecurity specialist I worked with on a project last year. He owes me a favor. 3 hours later, Eliza's contact had confirmed their suspicions. Victoria Chen Weiss was indeed using old Callaway architecture credentials to access client files, focusing particularly on security protocols and building schematics near the Federal Reserve. More disturbingly, she'd recently downloaded plans for the city's emergency response routing systems. It's enough to take to the authorities, James said, gathering the evidence they'd compiled. Eliza was about to agree when her laptop chimed with an incoming email from her cybersecurity contact. Wait, there's more. She quickly scanned the message, her face growing pale. Victoria's not just gathering intelligence, she's actively manipulating systems, test runs, and she's accessed my personal information. What? How? Through the old company HR files, I assume. But she's been searching for me, for Rebecca Callaway, as recently as yesterday, and she's accessed your hotel reservation information. She knows you're here in Seattle. James's expression hardened. She's tracking me. The break-in at my house, the attack, it wasn't random. She's worried I'm getting close to the truth. And now she knows you found me. Eliza felt a chill run through her. We're both potential threats to whatever they're planning. Before James could respond, Eliza's phone rang. Her downstairs security desk. Ms. Warren, there's a woman here insisting she needs to see you. Says she's with the Boston Police Department. Has ID, name's Detective Chen. Eliza and James exchanged alarmed glances. Tell her I'll be right down, Eliza said, then quickly ended the call. Victoria's here. Now. We need to leave, James said urgently. Back entrance? Fire escape through the bedroom window. But first, Eliza quickly transferred all their evidence to a cloud drive, then texted the access information to her cybersecurity contact with instructions to forward everything to the FBI if he didn't hear from her within 2 hours. They were halfway down the fire escape when they heard the crash of Eliza's apartment door being forced open. "Hurry," James urged, helping Eliza negotiate the metal steps in the pre-dawn darkness. They made it to the alley behind her building and ran to where James had parked his rental car several blocks away. "We need to get to the FBI field office," Eliza said as they drove, constantly checking the rearview mirror. "It opens at 8 a.m. "That's 3 hours from now," James replied grimly. "We need somewhere safe until then." They ended up in a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city, huddled in a corner booth, jumping at every opening door. Over bitter coffee, they discussed their options. "Once we bring in the FBI, this becomes real," James said quietly. Your real name, will be part of an official investigation. Your careful anonymity will be compromised." Eliza hadn't considered that. For 5 years, she'd built a life as Eliza Warren, protecting herself from the financial chaos of her past. Going to the authorities meant potentially exposing herself to that old identity, those old problems. "I don't have a choice," she finally said. "People could get hurt if Victoria and Martin execute their plan. I can't live with that on my conscience." James reached across the table, hesitantly covering her hand with his. "I'm sorry for everything that led to this moment, for the position I put you in 5 years ago, and for bringing this danger to your doorstep now." Eliza didn't pull her hand away. "I'm still angry about what happened. That doesn't just disappear because we're facing a common enemy." "I know. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know that not a day has passed that I haven't regretted what my actions did to you. Finding you, even under these circumstances, is more than I dared hope for." The sincerity in his voice pierced through layers of Eliza's carefully constructed defenses. "Let's survive this first," she said softly. "Then we can talk about where we go from here." At 8:05 a.m., they walked into the Seattle FBI field office. By noon, they were being debriefed by agents from both Seattle and Boston. By evening, Victoria Chen Weiss had been arrested in Eliza's apartment building, and Martin Weiss was placed in solitary confinement pending new charges. The evidence Eliza and James had compiled, combined with data recovered from Victoria's devices, revealed an elaborate plan to create a citywide emergency systems failure timed to coincide with the Federal Reserve's currency transfer. The chaos would have potentially cost lives in addition to facilitating the heist. 3 days later, Eliza sat across from her father in a different hotel lobby. This one quieter, less opulent than their first meeting place. The immediate danger had passed. Victoria was in custody, cooperating with authorities in exchange for leniency. Martin faced additional decades in prison. Eliza and James had given their formal statements and were no longer needed for the ongoing investigation. "What will you do now?" Eliza asked, stirring her tea absently. "Go back to Boston. Try to rebuild something from the ashes of my old life." James paused. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is considering reducing some of the penalties against me for the business collapse, given my cooperation in this case and the evidence that Martin's embezzlement contributed significantly to the company's failure." "That's good," Eliza said, genuinely glad for this small reprieve. "And you? Will you stay Eliza Warren?" She considered the question. "I think so. I've built a life here. A good one. Eliza feels more like me now than Rebecca ever did." James nodded, accepting this with a sad smile. "I've taken steps to address the credit issues," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "It's all in here. I've paid off the remaining fraudulent debts. There's also documentation you can use to have those accounts removed from your credit history entirely, given the proven fraud, and..." He hesitated. "There's compensation. It doesn't undo the damage, but it's something." Eliza opened the folder, her eyes widening at the cashier's check inside. "This is too much." "It's not enough," James countered. "It's what I could liquidate from my remaining assets. You lost years of your life rebuilding from what happened. You deserve this and more." Emotion tightened Eliza's throat. This gesture, concrete, practical, addressing the actual harm done, meant more than any number of verbal apologies. "There's something else I wanted to give you." James continued, producing a small box from his jacket pocket. Something that was always meant to be yours. Inside the box was her mother's wedding ring, a simple platinum band with a modest diamond. Mom wanted you to have this, James explained. Not necessarily for a wedding, though that too if you wanted, but as a connection to her, to your history. Eliza lifted the ring, feeling its weight. Unlike the financial restitution, this was a connection to her past that she didn't want to sever. Thank you, she whispered. I'm flying back tomorrow, James said after a moment. But I'd like to stay in touch, if you're open to it. Not to intrude on your life here, just to know you're okay. To be available if you ever need anything. Eliza considered his request, weighing the pain of the past against the unexpected connection they'd forged over the past few days. I think I'd like that, she said finally. Slowly, on my terms. Of course, always on your terms. As they parted ways outside the hotel, James hesitated, clearly wanting to embrace her but unsure if it would be welcome. Eliza made the decision for him, stepping forward to offer a brief but genuine hug. Be safe, she said as they separated. And next time you visit, maybe we can have dinner somewhere that doesn't involve criminal conspiracies or intense emotional revelations. James laughed, the sound reminding Eliza of happier times. I'd like that very much. Walking back to her apartment, which had been cleared by police and thoroughly cleaned after Victoria's invasion, Eliza felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of her secret past, the burden of her father's betrayal, the constant vigilance of maintaining her new identity, all of it seemed less oppressive now. She wasn't naive enough to think everything was resolved. Trust, once shattered, didn't reassemble without visible cracks. But for the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included reconciliation. Not an erasing of the past, but an integration of it into who she was becoming. As she entered her apartment, Eliza placed her mother's ring on the mantel, a bridge between her past and present. Then she took out her phone and pulled up her father's new contact information. She hesitated only briefly before typing. Text me when you land safely in Boston. A small step, but significant. Outside her window, Seattle's perpetual clouds had parted, revealing a rare glimpse of stars above the city lights. Eliza Warren, formerly Rebecca Calloway, stood at the threshold between her carefully constructed present and her complicated past, no longer running from either. There would be challenges ahead, difficult conversations, moments of doubt. But tonight, under this unexpectedly clear sky, she allowed herself to feel something she'd abandoned 5 years ago. Hope.